Good afternoon, fellow councillors, members of the public, the media. Welcome to the meeting of the 23rd of August 2022. Is there any apologies?
Perhaps the council prayer, Your Worship.
Public forum. Are there any changes? Thank you. You remain outstanding, please, for the council prayer. Almighty God, grant to us all needed guidance, wisdom and judgment as we face the tasks before us, and enable us now and always worthily to discharge the sacred trust placed by the people in our hands. Amen.
Amen.
Any changes to the declaration of interest? Thank you. We've got apologies from Councillor Scout, Councillor Abbott is on Zoom, Ms Cook is on Zoom, and Ms Duke is on Zoom as well. Move that they be received and accepted.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
To the vote, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the meeting of council held on the 26th of July 2022.
I'll move those, Your Worship.
I'll second them, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the Bluff Community Board meeting held on 1st of August 2022.
I'll move those minutes, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Seconded, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Put to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Recommendation to council chairperson's report 2024 board funding request. That council approved the spending of up to $15,000 for, I think 4 would be more appropriate than on the completion of the Bluff 2024 information boards.
I'll move that way, Your Worship.
I'll second that.
Seconded. Discussion. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 2nd of August 2022. The minutes of the Infrastructural Services Committee held on the 2nd of August 2022 be received.
Happy to move those, Your Worship.
For a second for that.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Discussion, questions, put it to the vote, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting held on the 9th of August 2022.
I'll move that the minutes are confirmed, Your Worship.
I'd second that, Your Worship.
Thank you. Discussion, question, put it to the vote, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Recommendations to Council. Hearings and deliberations on the dog control policy and the dog control bylaw.
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendations are there as noted in the agenda. I'm happy to move.
Second that, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Questions? Put it to the vote, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. To adopt the revised dog control bylaw, which incorporates the following changes.
So, Your Worship, we've just moved those.
Done on those. Just go down to G. Discussion or questions?
Yes.
Right.
I think you're up to the deliberations on the keeping of animals.
Deliberations on keeping of animals, poultry and bees bylaw to adopt the keeping of animals, poultry and bees bylaw.
Simple process, Your Worship. Happy to move that it's adopted.
Second that, Your Worship.
Any further discussion?
Your Worship, I did notice that Councillor Abbott had his hand raised just a moment ago.
Yes, thank you for that. It's just, Your Worship, you're very, very hard to hear. Everybody else is quite clear and distinct, but you're very, very muted on your microphone.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
I'll put that as number 8 then. Submission to Environment Southland on the draft freshwater visions to be moved at Council 1. Received the report, submissions to Environment Southland on the draft freshwater visions, and 2. Confirm the submission, noting that it was submitted to Environment Southland by the closing date of the 19th of August 2022. Did that go through in that time?
Did you wish?
Oh, good.
So, Rhiannon's here. If anyone has any questions to address the report.
Put it to the vote.
I don't think it's been moved yet, Your Worship, and Rhiannon's here in case anyone wishes to ask any questions.
Yes, welcome to the meeting.
Kia ora.
I think Councillor Clark.
Councillor Clark?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of reflections, I guess, given that this report's already been submitted. On the wastewater disposal issue, I just wondered what work we were going to do going forward, given that that under Three Waters we're likely to have to convert our discharge operations from land to water to land, and the report here quite rightly says that that will require a large parcel of land, and doesn't seem that within the city boundaries we have that. I just wondered where we go with that and whether that would involve some sort of liaison with potentially the Southern District Council as well.
So, through you, Your Worship, conversations are ongoing with the other councils, Environment Southern and Te Ao Marama, but obviously, as this paper notes, it will move to the responsibility of the new entity. Michael, is there any more you want to add on that?
Welcome.
Thank you. Through yourself, Your Worship, just in relation to the changing compliance standards through Te Mata Arawai, the standards will, for council are reflected in relation to our discussions and baselining for that compliance, but the compliance requirements at the moment through our discussions with the entities will fall on the entities. So we're working with them in relation to our asset management plans going forward, so that the compliance requirements, as we understand them, will be taken through as part of that Three Waters transition.
And just a follow-up question through you, Your Worship, on the issue of the closed landfill, which is the old landfill that's down by the new estuary. I just wonder whether we're engaging with Liz Craig, our local MP, because she runs an environmental group that includes Mana Whenua, about some of the leaching that we're getting out of that landfill into the estuary as well.
Again, through you, Your Worship, yes, Council is engaging with that group and Environment Southland on that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just following on from Councillor Clark's comment about the discharge of wastewater to land. Has anyone got the information on how many hectares we require to transform currently what we do? I'm aware of what New Plymouth is just going through, and it's quite massive, the amount of land they require. And then that would trigger, obviously, resource consent use, because not everyone would really want one of those things in their suburb or next door to them.
Through yourself, Your Worship, we have done some initial investigations, but I do not have that information on hand to be able to provide to you, Councillor. I can seek that and come back to Council in relation to that.
Councillor Clark.
Just as a follow-up point to what my colleagues raised, I think part of it also is not just the size, but it's the nature of the land that you go to. Yeah. So depending on what their absorbent rate, I guess if you pumped it out to Sandy Point, you'd be able to put more on per hectare than you would if you had some other place. But it is a significant amount of land.
Okay, my second question was regarding, in the staff report, it talks about wastewater disposal. No, solid waste it is, and that's from the regional landfill. Now, I'm very familiar with the construction of the cells out there and the stratum, the different strata they use, and the final impenetrable layer that catches the leachate, which they suck out and then bring for treatment. Now, it worries me that it says it may be subject to leaking into groundwater. Now, I've seen multiple presentations on that, and I can't see any failure of that system, but we're raising it as a problem, and I'm just weary that we may be out of our going against the science of what our provider is actually doing. That there is no leakage or possible leakage. But we're mentioning it here as a worry, and that to me it's a worry that's actually not real, because that bottom layer is almost 3/4 of an inch thick and is impenetrable. That's after it gets through the meter of filtering substances. It's just one of these factual things that I'm wary of raising an issue that is actually not an issue.
Through you, Your Worship. So, yes, that's why the word may is used, and really it's to draw attention to the fact that it's not yet fully known what all the issues are. But obviously, these draft freshwater visions are for the whole catchment, and the whole catchment is interrelated. But yes, you're right, it's about a issue that may exist but is yet not fully understood.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. Yep. Happy with that.
Any further questions, councillors? Yes.
Your Worship, it's not really a question, it's a comment. Fine for the first year or two, but the compounding effect of continued dumping would have to be taken into account in such a study, would it not?
Are you referring?
Like leaching into groundwater and things like that. If it wasn't dispersed or treated, the leachate wasn't treated, there could be a compounding thing rising into the higher levels above the protection level that Councillor Pottinger is talking about. So there'd be quite a bit of science investigation, I would imagine, before it's progressed with.
So again, through you, Your Worship, absolutely, these are all complex issues, and this paper is really just presenting how they are all complex and interrelated, and therefore the context for why the draft freshwater visions, while they appear simple in and of themselves, have many, many aspects, many of which are technically complex, and many of which are not yet fully understood.
Thank you, that was my worry. Thank you.
Happy to move the recommendations, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Seconded, Your Worship, just noting Reverend Cook has her hand up.
Yes, I was going to say that the issue with solid waste at the landfill is possibly not with leachate to groundwater through the cells, but over surface. So I think whilst the groundwater through the cell structure is not the issue, it may be what happens over land. So we need to be aware that there's more than one facet to this.
Okay. Any further, Councillor Clark?
Yeah, two issues just on the submission that we made to Environment Southland, and maybe Michael can answer this. It talks on the bottom of the page about the Three Waters entity picking up the responsibility for investment, but how do our consents sit at the moment? I understand that the Bluff treatment station is due for consent before 2024. Am I correct to assume that? Steve?
2025.
25, yep, fine, that's helpful. And the other issue is our current progress on identifying a alternative water supply. One of the worries I have is that we're one of the few councils in the country that doesn't have an alternative water supply, so if the Ariki River was at risk at any stage, we have very little capacity to provide fresh water. And I just wonder what sort of progress we're making. I know we've been doing some drilling, but is that likely to be resolved, even if it doesn't mean that we actually have the piping in place, but do we have the sort of test result that could lead the water entity to understand that there is an alternative there? Because I'm worried that we will not be a priority on that issue when it comes to the overall South Island. And looking across the table.
Through yourself, Your Worship, there is a report due back to Council. We have completed our first two investigations, so there's a report due back to Council in relation to that about the emergency water supply or alternative water supply. That report is due back in, I think, the next Infrastructure Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, questions? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Submissions on the smoke-free environments and regulated products. Smoke, tobacco,
Your Worship.
amendment bill. Yes, Councillor.
I just have a question. I just hope someone can answer this for me. It highlights here that it's a smoked tobacco product only. why isn't chewing tobacco mentioned? Like, it's more dangerous to the user than smoking the normal type of cigarettes that's available. So can anyone answer that?
Can you still get it?
No.
Through you, Your Worship.
Yes.
So yes, this bill is very specific in that it is relating to smoked tobacco products. Vaping is covered in a few occasions. I can't answer the question as to whether chewing gum is
It's not chewing gum, it's tobacco that
chewing.
people...
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
chewing tobacco. I can't answer that question, I'm afraid. I don't have that
Okay.
information to hand.
I possibly can help.
So who do we go to? Lindsay.
Yeah.
Councillor Abbott.
There is a product called Nicorette, which some of us smokers use to substitute cigarettes, and it has a high content of nicotine, something like 4% per gum. So that answers that question. But can I take the opportunity to actually talk about what I want to talk about in this particular subject? It may surprise you to know that I am, for the most part, in agreement with it, being a smoker of some 63 years and probably having learned nothing else behind the boat shed, about 10 or 12 years of age. But the problem that I have is that I think the suggestion that 2009 children born thereafter not be allowed to smoke becomes too draconian, and I just can't support that part of the submission.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion, councillors? Councillor.
Through you, Your Worship. Several things about this. I guess I really struggle where the government's trying to go with this. I think they're covering over a goal of New Zealand being smoke-free in 2025 that they'll never get to. It seems to me that we don't know the true health damage potential for vaping. It seems to me that vaping products have nicotine added to them, which is by nature addictive. So that the smoking industry is going away from cigarettes and into vaping, where they can hold their clients by way of adding nicotine into it. I understand that previous attempts by the government to restrict the levels of nicotine so that they can be reduced down over time has not been successful, and they've in effect to some extent turned a blind eye to some suppliers that have quite high levels of nicotine in their vaping products. And so I just can't understand how a government would want to take away cigarettes knowing that the health impact is tar, and I applaud them for doing that. But they don't seem to be close enough to actually banning cigarettes at any stage in the foreseeable future, which was their goal. And then we replace that with a habit that's now vaping, which has nicotine, which by nature is addictive. And the other issue is the issue of our percentage of people that smoke in Southland, which is nearly 18%. And I understand that's the highest in the country. And so that's a worry for us. And I don't think that by reducing the outlets down from 6,500 down to 500 will change consumption, because it doesn't matter whether you've got a shop sitting outside of school. It's not many school kids that have got $30 or $35 in their back pocket to buy a packet of cigarettes. And if they've got that resource, they'll go down the road and get it anyway. So I just think we're scooting around the real issues. So just a reflection on that. But I appreciate that we had to put forward some sort of response to it.
Thank you. Councillor Sova.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in relation to Councillor Abbott's comment, I would just like to point out that the draft submission actually records that after listening to the views of our Youth Council, we are recommending that the bill focuses on taking much stronger measures to reduce widespread access to and harm from vaping, rather than introducing age-related limits for use of tobacco. So in fact, our draft submission addresses what Councillor Abbott was hoping for, and I hope in that with that additional comment that Councillor Abbott can support the draft submission. After our Youth Council had given us that feedback, that is what the draft submission has actually said.
Interesting. Councillor Evelyn.
Yes, kia ora, Your Worship. Through you, I'd also like to comment on the submission in that whilst it's aspirational, or the bill is aspirational, that our young people recognise that not only is smoking harmful, but potentially vaping can be as harmful or in some cases more harmful more quickly, and that there is increasing evidence of adverse impacts from that. I really do think that decreasing the number of outlets, particularly in areas of access to schools, things like that, is not actually unwise. We see this in other areas of the country with liquor outlets, with food outlets, where that and have health risks attached. I don't see why this council shouldn't submit in the hope that the young people's voice will be heard as well. If they are recognising and telling us, we should be listening, I think, in this instance, because usually it's young people saying, oh, you should let us keep on doing these things. When we're hearing our young people say, we are recognising this, whilst it's, for some, it's probably already too late. But those who are yet quite young, such as my mokopuna, this is a timely sort of a decision that we can make to make difference. As for banning the sale of cigarettes altogether, I guess if we're looking at the percentage of people who smoke now compared to when I was a child or a teenager, the percentage is much less. What we want to see is that percentage going down, and there's more than one way of achieving that, and one is by making things harder to get, one is by not allowing people to start or discouraging people from starting. So I support our submission on this matter.
Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really just wanted to tautoko what Reverend Cook had said, because she practically took the words right out of my mouth. We know that it's a bit of a problem when our young people are recognising that it is a significant, or harming them, and that young people are picking up and vaping when that would never have picked up a cigarette. And with vaping, it's silent, it's extremely harmful. The science is backing that now, and not only that, but community experience with young people, you know, hacking up a lung, developing pneumonia, and there's all sorts of instances, or popcorn lung, where, you know, I'm sure Councillor Lewis would be able to give you a really accurate depiction of how that occurs. But when they're turning around and telling us that their peers are picking up something that they otherwise wouldn't have picked up, and which is on par or more harmful than smoking, I think that we really need to sit down and listen. And the original Youth Council was part of driving our council smoke-free policy on reserves and parks. And this too, and the extension of that, I think is just one of those times where we really do need to sit down and listen to youth, the youth perspective, and that is, you know, removing widespread access and age-related limits. I would note that they would say that they did prefer to limit the use rather than have age-related restrictions, because they felt like it was a bit more of a power imbalance, or the adults telling us what to do rather than trusting that we can make the right decisions. So,
Councillor Lewis.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I guess most of the things I was going to raise have been raised, but it's very important to note that nicotine is not possibly the major problem. It is tobacco itself, the tars and things like that, which cause the irritant in the lungs and causes the progressive lung diseases, including lung cancer, of course. That's not a new thing. It's been happening for many years. In my profession, I've seen many people have died because of these conditions. Or their general health has been compromised just from the asthmatic side effects and things like that. Councillor Crackett mentioned the popcorn lung. That is one side effect of gross vapour. And the recipients or propellants in these vapours are not innocent bystanders. They do cause lung disease. If anybody wishes, I can actually flick on some of the reports I've been reading over the many years, but I won't bore you with them right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, firstly, I'd like to commend the Youth Council on standing their ground and their democratic right to have a choice, as everyone else has, and not be treated as another group and told what to do. But what annoys me is the hypocrisy of this bill and failing to recognise the elephant in the room, which is that 31% of New Zealand's adult population over the age of 18 is clinically obese. And the pressure that has on our health system far, far outweighs anything that smoking does. Yet the government does not go near this problem that is hurting everyone. And again, it's a self-choice. You choose what you eat, you choose what you become, you choose your lifestyle. Same with smoking. You don't have to, it's your choice. But it's ironic that they're all keen on the smoke-free 25, yet we progress down the road of obesity and no one is addressing it and the problems it causes. So it's just, to me, this strikes me down, as I would add something, actually get up and smell the roses and actually do some proper work on the health of this country.
Thank you. Councillor Soper again.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm sorry, I have to correct the last statement because there was an investigation into obesity and type 2 diabetes done in Parliament with 54 recommendations in the recent past. So I really do have to correct the statement that obesity is not being addressed, and it is a public health issue which is certainly being addressed and will be further addressed by Health New Zealand. Thank you.
I'd like to speak to that and say that there are no signs of that being addressed. I watched an ad on TV the other night where a lost litre for $2, you could buy a litre and a half of soft drink for $2. Now, you know, that's amazing considering the price of a litre of milk. And you're looking at the limitation of the amount of outlets for smoking and stuff like that, yet sugar-laden products are just are so easy to get anywhere and whatever. Again, it's your own choice, but for what Councillor Soper is seeing, I am seeing no action at all in people changing their lifestyle. And clinically obese means that when you're deemed clinically obese is that your body weight actually affects your health. So that's the definition of clinically obese. So 31% is not a number for this country to be proud of.
Councillor Crackett.
Oh, I think that was
Councillor Soper, sorry.
Mrs.
Since
Cooch is
it's
waiting
not
too.
directly relevant to the debate, I think, Your Worship, we can probably call it to an end there, and no doubt Councillor Pottinger will have the chance the next time there is a bill open to make a submission on limiting the sale of such goods as he has mentioned, which has been given the opportunity in previous parliamentary bills. And I'm sure Councillor Pottinger can make a submission in the future.
Mrs. Coote wants to talk, please.
Councillor Coote.
Thank you. I just want to actually firstly say that totally support the Youth Council's position around the bill. And also, I think one thing that people forget about is the second-hand smoke, where people that are non-smokers, you know, are literally affected in some way or form. And so I definitely support the bill going forward.
Thank you. And all right, Councillor Clark, and then I'll put the motion.
Thank you, Worship. It would be helpful, I guess, to have some end game on this bill. If we could know what Parliament was expecting. When they say smoke-free by 2025, to me that means that there'll be no tobacco products by 2025, and if people want to vape and have nicotine in there, that they'll have that. But every time I pick up a report, we get slight overtones about customs picking up illegal imports of undeclared cigarettes and everything. So it'd be nice to know whether the government actually will at some stage prior to 2025 signal that they're going to totally ban tobacco products, and then we'd know what the end game was.
Thank you for that. I'll put the motion. Received a report submission on the smoke-free environment and regulated products amendment bill and confirm the draft submission. Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Carried.
Recorded, please.
Moving on to item 10. I didn't complete it in time for the agenda, so come up. Excuse me. Any urgent business? This the, oh, sorry. We got it on mine.
I'll move the middle report be received.
Yes. Oh, well. This is an edited version I'm reading from. Move. And I'll second that. Any discussion, questions, put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Your Worship, Councillor Pottinger had a question.
Oh. Councillor Pottinger.
Yes, it's regarding, I see you attended the Entity D meeting, which is regarding Three Waters on the 19th of August. I just had a question around a couple of the key issues with, obviously, the other members of Entity D was regarding the equity around each member and the prioritisation of work. Are you able to comment on how that was discussed? Because obviously different councils and our council's already made it quite clear in our submission that we are going to be worse off equity-wise. What was the view of the other councils regarding this equity?
Who else was there at that meeting?
I may be able to provide some clarity, but also no clarity at all, in that they haven't arrived at any solid arrangement as to what that split will look like currently.
So for every dollar we currently spend and a ratepayer spends on Three Waters, we get it back, obviously. So for every dollar we're going to be putting into Entity D, how much are we going to get back out of that dollar?
That policy work is looking to be undertaken in from May 2022 to 1st of July 2023.
So you're telling me that if you have to create a policy for every dollar you put in, obviously means, yeah, it's either going to be, it's three choices. You're either going to get back what you put in, you're going to get more than you put in, which can't see how that's going to work. And the other option that we're worried about is that we're going to get less back. Correct. Now, so there's going to be a policy that determines what you're going to get back.
Effectively, that's what they're saying, that there's part of the outstanding policy work that's underway, and then there's also further legislation and policy change to come. Trust me, I'm as confused and frustrated as you are. I can't give you any answers because they couldn't give me any answers. So I think there's not a lot that we can do right now, unfortunately.
So really, they have no clue?
I know they're working on it. We know they're working on it. We are just effectively in stasis until they release more information.
So does that relate to the Times article today saying that the people of Bluff will be
advantaged compared with our situation? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I might be able to add some clarity to this. About 2 years ago, that was one of the questions I put to the then program director for Three Waters at DIA, and I said, look, if we're going to have a flat rate for these services across the South Island, so each household will pay the same amount, where will you be investing the money in the short to medium term? Because that's important about what Councillor Pottinger is saying. When will we get back our share of the investment that needs to be put in? He said we haven't worked that out yet, which is what Councillor Cracker is now saying 2 years later. So I then said, well, is it reasonable to assume that the main priorities for investment by the water entity D will be Queenstown, Wanaka and Selwyn councils who have massive growth? And is it fair to assume also that because of Ngāi Tahu's influence there, that they are seeking to have small rural communities that have high deprivation to also have an upgrade in their water facilities, quite rightly so, that the rest of us will not be getting much by way of investment in the short to medium term, and the DIA said you've answered your own question. So it's an important issue, because if we invest at the same rate as every other council and we don't get back any investment over and above the ones that we've already talked about, which is our alternative water supply, if we don't get that, then we're in fact subsidising the growth in other cities or the lack of investment that's been in other cities. So that cross subsidy is quite important.
So the other question was regarding the shareholding. Now, it's great to have a shareholding, whatever it is, for 50,000 people, whatever that means. But Entity D will end up with a debt. Now, the estimated debt of the entire project of the four entities is between 120 and 180 billion dollars. So let's say, population-wise, Entity D might have a debt of 30 billion. Is this council legally going to have a percentage of that debt? Currently, we have a debt of $16.3 million on our infrastructure. So by moving into Entity D, will we have on our effectively a debt of that $30 billion, a percentage of that, being a shareholder of Entity D?
Well, my impression is that it's a cruel situation we find ourselves in, because we're right on the cusp of an election, and there's very short notice given to the people involved, and including ourselves. Councillor Clark.
Just to add to what Councillor Potter's already said.
No, I was just asking that question.
Sure, yeah, I can probably help answer that.
Yeah.
Again, asked about 2 years ago of DIA, with Department of Internal Affairs. The 185 million across the country is not an upfront debt. It's to cover infrastructure investments over a 30-year period.
Billion.
So it's phased in. Yeah, sorry, 1.85 billion. So it's spread out over time, and of course, as they service that, they'll be recovering it off us. Hence the issue of economy of scale, which nobody agrees that we're going to get, and that we will be worse off than if we stood alone. That excites. We'd be better off with the current assets we got, which are 1.2 billion, with quite a measly debt loading of about 16.5 million. We'd be better off solving our own issues than being in with others that are trying to solve much bigger issues.
So getting back to my very first question was, what was the feeling of the other councils in Entity D about the equity? Can someone answer that?
Sorry, what was that, Councillor Pottinger?
What I was asking His Worship, who attended the meeting, what the feeling of the other councils were regarding equity, getting their value back for their own, because every Dunedin's got different needs than we have. So does Central Otago, so the Southern District. So I just wondered where the group of those people sat, mayors and everything. That must have been raised. It must have been. So I'm just asking for an answer. There were people attending a meeting that some of us weren't allowed to attend.
May I, Your Worship? Thank you, Your Worship. I know you posed the question to Your Worship, but I may be better placed to answer it. Firstly, you weren't not allowed to go. We were asked to send a delegate, and it was the chair's group that actually decided on who that delegate was. And as Deputy Chair of Infrastructure, that day that I stood in for you, it was decided that I would go. Secondly, you're totally right. There's a lot of tension in the room between mayors, who, like you have mentioned previously, the Local Government Act doesn't actually provide for us at this point for us to think nationally. We are dutifully there to think locally. And so that creates a lot of tension across the room when there's a lot of mayors, chairs, councillors asking lots of questions that don't have clear answers for yet. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of tension in the room. One of the questions that were asked was very rightly the one that you've asked of several different ways. And we don't get a very clear answer on that either. Everyone, we're encouraged not to think of in a patch protection manner because, like you said, like Councillor Clark said, a third of Māori communities don't have reticulated water systems. And it's statistics like that and rural communities that stand to benefit the most. That's been very clear in a position throughout the whole reform. But any further than that, I can't provide you any clarity because they haven't provided us any further clarity.
So it's going to be a tax rather than a rate, because a rate is something that you get back for services you receive. A tax is a tax that can go anywhere.
Ideally, we would like for it to look like that, or otherwise we're going to have yet more mud slung at us from a community perspective over something the government has taken out of our hands, made us conform to, and then if it comes out looking like a rate, we're still going to get the mud slung at us for a rate, which is typically associated with the council. But Councillor Pottinger and Councillor Clark, and thanks for engaging in this conversation and letting me be your representative at the zone meeting. I think it's really important that we have someone at the table at these things. I can't provide you any more clarity than that, but I think because there's so much that is up in the air, I think it would be best that we leave this for now. And it is off the back of a mayoral report, not actually substantive in a Three Waters report. So I think it's best that we do leave the matter lie on the table. Like I said,
the mayoral report is open to questions, and the Entity D one is a serious meeting. So I believe the questions are quite valid.
That's fair. I just don't see any point in us debating what could happen because we're literally waiting to be dictated to, effectively.
No, the original questions were to find out the feelings of the other council leaders with these issues.
Well, I felt our anger there.
Worship, I would tend to concur with Councillor Crack at this stage, but there are 20, I think, areas in Entity D, ranging from Bulla, Westland, Waimati, Dunedin, and some of the larger areas, some of the smaller areas, to have a consensus in that comparatively short time frame would be not possible to get.
Councillor Clark.
Just as a final reflection, Councillor Pottinger and I went to a select committee of Parliament in Dunedin last week, and I was quite surprised the level of pushback there is on the water entities bill. We've previously in Invercargill have been quite vocal about our desire to potentially opt out of this reform, and other councils were quite critical of our position, thinking that we weren't a team player for the whole South Island. And yet, from my observations, a lot of those councils have now flipped over, realised the opposition they've got within their own ratepayer groups, being close to election time, and are now all either opting against the proposed bill, or alternatively are seeking to have a pause or a referendum. And I think in some ways our council has led the way and others are now following.
Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Your Worship. I tend to agree with Councillors Crackett and Lewis that the lobbying for or against Three Waters at this meeting has gone far enough at this point. As Councillor Crackett has pointed out, and as others have acknowledged, there is a select committee process underway to which this council has already put in and spoken to its submission. Councillor Crackett has given very good feedback, as much as she possibly can, on the Zone 6 Entity D meeting. I cannot see the point of continuing this. No doubt we will discuss Three Waters at some later point, but to continue this as some sort of anti or pro Three Waters lobbying exercise around this table at this point seems to me entirely unproductive for this meeting. So could we please draw this particular discussion to a close, Your Worship?
All right, well, I'll take note of that, and Councillor Arnold, you'll be the last
I was just
speaker.
going to say, yeah,
No,
I'm sitting and
Reverend-
listening to a lot of opinions and discussions and bits and pieces, but Councillor Ponger's question was just a straightforward question. What was the feel of in the room at the time? It was just a straightforward question that really there's just an answer required. And that's it. It's not a discussion about Three Waters, as I see it.
In fairness, Your Worship, Reverend Cook's been waiting to speak.
I couldn't hear that.
I said, in fairness, Reverend Cook has been waiting for some time to speak.
All right.
So, yes, so Councillor Soper and Councillor Lewis and Crackett have really clearly summed up what I wanted to say. This was the Mayor's report. It was not a Three Waters discussion. We've spent considerable time on it, and I think, in fairness to everybody, that we should wait until we're better informed before we discuss this again.
Yes, although several of the delegates there said expressed their anger. Thank you.
There's a question.
Is anyone excited?
Urgent business?
No.
Oh, yes. I'll move the motion. Oh, it's been moved and seconded. That the report of the mayoral report, be received.
Move.
Seconded.
It's been moved by me and confirmed by His Worship.
I'll put that now. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Yes,
Carried.
I'd like it recorded that I'm against. And the rationale for that is that it's inappropriate for a mayor to give us 6 months worth of reports in one report. It undermines the ability to ask questions about what's in the report, as we've now found with Councillor Ponger.
Still, voices were raised that this was the biggest move that we'll probably face as councillors, and considering the short time frame, I'd allow that to continue. Urgent business? None. Thank the members of the press and public for their attendance here this afternoon.
Your Worship, you just need that moved and seconded in public. Motion to go into public excluded in public.
I'll move that we go into public excluded.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Put it to the vote. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.